Hi there, welcome back to a TouchDesigner tutorial. In today's video we're going to be looking at creating a audio reactive geometric shape with sort of infinite possibilities in terms of the generation of the shape, the movement, and the rendering of it. We'll be using a lot of very common and popular techniques in TouchDesigner to create this in terms of the post-processing. And then also explaining what is happening in the geometry side of things, so that way you can generate your own unique looking shapes, as well as creating your own audio reactive sections. Before I dive into this tutorial, it's worth noting that this file is available for download on my Patreon below. The file will come with a few different shapes that you can plug in and play with that have been quickly pre-crafted, along with a few different materials that I've rendered out. For example, if I swap to this material here and then remove the blur, you can see we have the exact same shape that has been generated, except simply the visuals change. And then if I plug in a different shape here, maybe bring back the blur and then change it back to the to this material, you can see that we get a whole variety of options, along with some color options. We're not going to go across every bit of this when we're recreating this network today, just the broad strokes, but it will be pretty easy for you to add in your own additions if that is something you want to do. Awesome. All right, let's dive straight into the tutorial. So I'm going to keep this network up here as reference, just so that I can refer back to it if need be, but we should be pretty alright. I'm just going to plug this one back in and then disable the lookup and then turn off the background. Cool. Alright. So the first thing we want to do is go ahead and get a SOP called Super Squad. We're basically going to morph this into a shape that we like, and then that's going to be the foundation of everything. We want to change it from a mesh to a polygon, and then essentially play around with a combination of this radius by dragging it up, stretching it out, maybe the rows to get different shapes, columns, etc., etc. Now I'm going to actually copy this shape that I've generated up here. You're welcome to pause the video and copy these settings if you want. The reason why is because I've just already generated a shape like this. Very, very simple, but if that's something you want to create, then feel free. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to plug this into a twist. This twist, essentially, when we twist it, you can see how it gets warped up like that. We're going to use this and attach this to the speed of the song, so it sort of has this infinite sort of twist movement going on. And by the time it reaches my point, it was quite deformed, but you might want to obviously avoid that. The next thing we're going to do is plug in a noise. The noise here, we're just going to bring all of these parameters down, and even the amplitude we're going to set quite low to 0.1. You see it just adds a little bit of noise like so. I believe that is all these settings. I've also set the period a bit low, and then harmonics I've played with a little bit, but ultimately it's not super important that you copy the exact same settings. Obviously, if it is something that you want to replicate exactly, then feel free, but I think the point of this tutorial is that we can sort of create a lot of different unique geometric shapes and hopefully create an infinite amount of audio reactive visuals from it. I'm also going to change on the twist here the primary axis to Y, just so it spins along the axes of the shape in the up-down direction. Cool. For now, I'm going to connect this to a null. That's just good practice when ending a line. I'm going to leave some space for later. Then we're going to connect this into our geometry network. Now, if this is going a bit too fast for you guys, you might want to try out a more simple tutorial. Not to say this will be difficult, but I'm not going to explain every little thing like I do in most of my other tutorials. But for a rendering network, we're just going to need a camera, geometry, and a light. I'm also going to later add an environment light, but we'll come back to that just for the texturing. Then do a render network. Now, like in my tutorials, I have multiple things going in from my other networks. I'm just going to quickly assign all of these. You probably do not need to do this step. Cool, and then we have our shape. The noise parameter is setting this to move automatically. We can click this blue button, see it as our background. So quickly, I'm going to connect this to an RGB key, which will set the transparent things objects to black on default, so giving us a black background, and then connect this to a null, and then we can set this as our background if you want. So you can already see possibly the foundations of how we get to this one on the left here. You can sort of see how they match up already, although I have I have multiple things going in. Just gonna set the geometry. There we go. You can sort of see how this shape is coming about by how we've just twisted lots of objects on top of each other like so. Let's hide this render. The next thing we want to do is between this noise and the null, we want to do a copy, which is essentially going to allow us to duplicate this object, and then we want to rotate it on an axis, not this one, sorry, on our Z axis. Yes, let's do like 45, so it's directly in line like that. You could do 90 if you want to do a more symmetrical shape like that, but I'm going to do 45. I also have rotated it on this axis here. Oh, that's because I need to rotate the shape. Sorry. There's a lot of small finessed. I sort of played around based off another tutorial to get this look. So there's a few things I might forget. So what we want to do actually is set the geometry here, rotation on the x-axis to 90. Which is just going to rotate it so it's facing the camera in the spiral sort of shape. Then we want to create a perpetual movement like that. To do that, we're actually going to either type in the ABS time code, or we can start by doing our audio reaction technique. So let's go ahead and import audio. So like we do in all of our tutorials, you can drag and drop an audio file in or grab an audio device. I'm just going to do the default audio file, connect this to an audio device out, configure this with the settings here so that you can hear it. I'm going to bypass this one so I don't hear it. In the palette up here in the top left, we're going to go to Tools, Audio Analysis, drag and drop, plug that one in, plug that to a select. Awesome. We can connect this one to a speed as well. And then in the audio analysis, I can click this plus to interact. And I'm just going to enable a few different options. Probably not going to use all of them, but you never know. And the first thing I want to do is now use the FMSD, which basically tells us how faster or intense a song is at any point. Which is being plugged into the speed, which will be an ever increasing value. For example, if we want something to rotate infinitely, we want to just perpetually increase the value, which the speed does at the rate of the intensity of the song. In layman's terms, it'll increase the faster the song is or the more the intense the song is. So we can use that value to actually control the rotation. So if I plug from the speed into the rotate and then a chop reference, you can see it's spinning quite slowly. So we can also do a times 10 like that. And now if I pause the song, actually that does not pause the song, does it? If I pause the song like that, you can see the rotation completely stops. And then as I start the song again, it starts speeding up, starts speeding up, starts speeding up, and it's pretty good. I quite like this speed. It's not too fast, not too intense, but if you want to go for something faster, then you're more than welcome to. Awesome. I'm just going to double check the geometry doesn't have any more settings. I zoomed out a little bit by turning the scale down. Pretty optional if you want to do that or not. And then I'm also going to do a convert as well between the copy and the null, and I'm just going to make sure I get the right settings. So we want to convert it from a all types to a NURBS curve, like so, and then bring the UV order down and then preserve original. This is just to give us a bit more of a flat sort of geometric shape or look to it, I suppose. You can also, again, this is another opportunity for you to sort of play around with differentiating from this tutorial. Maybe that's something you want to do afterwards. And again, when we plug values from the audio into here, realize that every value that we change is also something you can assign to be controlled by an audio react, or by these audio values, if that is something you want to do. Awesome. So I'm going to leave the audio activity at there for now. And the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and add in the environment, light, and texture. So above, basically the extra things I've added on is I did another little wee rendering network and then made it a bunch of particles. We're going to skip that for the tutorial today, but then I also created a few different materials like you can see here, and then we can drag and drop to assign them on the geometry. For example, if I drag this line on to here, it creates the geometry made out of lines, but I'm actually going to be going for a bit of a chromatic displaced look, and I'm going to achieve that with this PBR material, so I'm going to drag and drop that on. This PBR is good for when you want to sort of create a very quick texture that doesn't have much detail. We're not going to go super in depth into texturing today, but what we will do is turn the roughness down, which creates this very reflective look, and already you can see the way the light is interacting with the shape creates a very, very cool sort of look. You can also play around with shadows if that is something you want to do. I have my other particles going on here, so I'm not going to deal with that. You can also play with the dimmer. For example, you can turn it up to get 5. The thing we want to do is add in a environment light. Yours may look a little something like this right now, but what we want to do is add in an environment light to this network. So under our comp, we want to do environment light, then go movie file in, top. Basically, we're creating a reflective material, which is going to reflect the environment around it, which we're picking this default file and then assigning it to the environment map on there. And now when we, this should work on default for you, but I'm going to assign the lights like so. You can see that now the texture of the object is still this black and white, or this black material, but it is reflecting this environment light. Now you can obviously keep you can keep the object looking like this if you really want to. It could be quite cool. Or additionally, you can play with changing the environment to like a black and white one, and then assigning it like there, and then assigning that back onto lights. It's really up to you. In combination with playing with the lighting and texturing, there's a dimmer on this environment light, sorry, is the one I want to play with. You can turn that right up as well if you want to, as well as some post-processing effects that we're going to add in now. You sort of create this interesting little look. Now, I don't actually remember specifically what texturing I did, but before I did that, I'm going to add in my 2 more quick audio reactive elements. So the first of that is going to be this noise. So, well, that's quite intense, but I basically want the object to be a solid sort of shape that's spinning around, and then a little bit of maybe that's too little, but a little bit of like this sort of pulsing movement to happen on a kick. Instead of using the kick value here, which is a normalized 0 and 1, so it's either 0 on or off, I'm instead going to use the low. So I'm going to drag by clicking plus on the select and going low onto the amplitude like so. Then I'm going to enable the audio analysis here and essentially just change the values. So maybe make it a lot more smooth, bring down the gain so it doesn't increase as much. Maybe bring the threshold up as well, gain back up. Could even bring the add down a little bit. Actually, let's keep the add at 0, and then let's bring the threshold up even more. I'm quite happy with that. That's a very, very subtle movement, but I don't mind creating something a little bit more subtle right now. And then the next value that we want to do is we basically want to assign this twist, which gives us this much more deformed shape. We want to assign this movement to the song as well. So there's a lot of different ways you could do this. In the visual above, I use the same technique with the speed, where I have this, essentially if I plug the FMSD into the strength here, I have this happening, where it's just getting more and more warped as the song goes on, and then the faster the song, the more it will warp. Another option, for example, is that I've played around with creating an LFO chop, which will pulse between two values. I've then plugged this into the speed into the second value here, the source wave, and then assigned this to the strength by chop reference. And then from here I've sort of played with the amplitude. I think I might have set this to 100 actually, but that might be too high for you. You could try 10, you could try turning the amplitude up, make it a little bit faster. Basically play with a lot of different values. You can also plug it into the wave value there, or you can actually forego this entirely and use just an LFO like that. And if I bring the frequency down and then maybe make the amplitude 100, you sort of get that sort of movement, which is quite cool. And I just sort of want to encourage everyone here to do something, a little bit like pick your own sort of route. I'm sort of just making this up as I go along, and then gonna make final adjustments along the end, how I see fit. But I quite like the look of this already. It's looking like a bit of a 3D flower warping very slowly with the music. So let's do some post-processing. So I'm going to actually go ahead and copy this network. The reason I'm going to do this is so that way I can pick the elements which I think will really add quite a lot, and then also just quickly get rid of others that I don't think will. This will just be very useful for helping to learn some useful techniques. And then we can probably skip the displacement today. I use that quite a bit in my tutorials, but I don't think that is necessary for this one. And then we're going to plug that one in like so. Whoa! All right. Do not threat. We are here to explain everything. So we're going to go bit by bit through this network. So the first thing we want to do is we want to grab a depth top. This is going to give us the depth value, and then we want to drag the render on like that. Also, if your render, you might want to set the resolution to 1920 by 1080 if you have the premium version. Otherwise, you can do a square, 12p, like you can set this to whatever you like. From this depth, I want to connect in a threshold. We're going to be using this to create a depth of field blur. So you can see when I bring the threshold all the way up to 1, it essentially gives us the whole object blurred. But I, as you might have seen in the video, want to basically create a blur towards the edges here, and you can see that this is a three-dimensional object. So I want basically the petals of the flowers to blur and keep the front the same. The way I'm going to do that is by very briefly bringing this threshold down ever so slightly until I get something like that. You could even add in a soften if you want as well. Again, you want to do very fine details here. The way I do that is I hover holding my middle mouse down and then drag over these values and then go left or right. So I'm quite happy with where that is. Now to create a blur, we want to add in a right click this line, connect your render, drag your RGB key and null off to the side, and then connect in a Luma blur. I've already done that, and so I have my Luma blur here, and I can plug it in like so. And let's make that alongside our background so we can sort of see the difference between the two right here. And basically you just want to set the strength of your blur, which will blur all the white elements. You could have like a very big difference if you want something like that, quite harsh, or if you want something quite refined, then maybe you want to go for a lower number. Maybe you want to bring the soften off completely and bring that value down. It's really up to you. Again, I'm going to keep it like that. Cool. The next thing we want to connect in is a bloom, which we can get from image filters under our palette. Drag and drop the bloom in. You're welcome to copy the settings that I have. Essentially, if I show you what's going on, that's the settings I have. If you want the bloom to act a little bit more like you would expect, you can set it to 11-bit float like that. I've then, in this bloom, it's worth noting that I have a bit of audio reactivity going on. So what I'm actually doing is I'm dragging down the threshold every time there's a high note. So the way I do that is I drag the high value from the select of the audio, like so, into our threshold. You'll see that this now increases, which I'm going to quickly connect in a null, like so, just so we can see what's happening. You can see that the threshold is maxed out when there's no high and takes away, but we sort of want to reverse that effect. The way we do that is, for example, is go 1 minus, which will set the threshold of a default of 1 and then increase it. But you can see that's quite jarring. So this is the point where we sort of just want to play around with some maths. So maybe I want the default threshold to be, basically pick a value like there. So 0.5. I quite like it sitting at 0.5 on default. So I'm going to do an initial value of 0.5 and then plus. Then I'm going to wrap this surrounding thing in brackets and maybe make it let's say times it by 0.5, just make it half as strong. I'm going to make this a minus instead. And then see if I like that. That's probably a bit too flashy and intense. Good chance to go back to the audio analysis, make it more smooth, make the gain lower. There we go. See, now I've got a very nice, soft sort of glow effect. And I got those values just by playing around with the knobs, so I suggest you totally do the same. It's already coming along quite nicely. Going to hide this render. The next thing I've connected in is a feedback, which is again another tool from our palette. This feedback is just creating a bit of a very subtle sort of feedback. You can see if I turn that right up, that's essentially what's happening, but we just want a very little amount of it. I then have our RGB key. After the RGB key, I have a level. I'm doing absolutely nothing with this level. It's just a very handy thing to have if you want to play with the values. For example, go for a much harsher defined look. So we go brightness up, black level down, maybe brightness, maybe gamma up, contrast also a little bit up, something like that. That's quite cool. I'm pretty happy with that. This might be a good chance for you to also play around with the environment light. Be like, oh, what if I disable the mono? Do I like that a bit more? Maybe you want to change the value of the color. All are good options. Speaking of changing the color, for example, if I set this monochrome back on, if you connect in from the level to a lookup and then add in a ramp, basically if we compare this ramp, you can see that we have our black value here and then our most white value here. And with this ramp, if I set this white value to a green, that will mean it will keep all the black values the same, but then change this shade of white to black to green to black when I plug in it to the lookup, the second parameter of the lookup. So it simply just applies the green filter like that. What I've done is I've gone in here, clicked in, like added in values like that, and played with the colors until I just found something that I thought was cool, plugged it into the lookup and was like, cool, I like that. Didn't really put too much thought and effort into it. Maybe even want to bring the black label down a little bit like that. Completely up to you what you might do here. Maybe you want to go for a like variety of colors and go for like a purpley kind of vibe here. Make that a little bit more deeper. If you want to go for something quite intense, maybe I could make this green even closer to purple, so that way you get a bit more of a natural transition between the two. And then this green as well, I could make that a lot darker. Again, just play around with it, do as you like. Even now I'm like, oh, this is looking kind of cool, let me play with this. Oh, what does this one do? Yeah, play around with that. The next thing I've added in is a noise mask. So we want to connect the lookup to a composite there. I've then connected the lookup to by right clicking and going noise. I've set the noise period all the way down to 0. I'm going to add in the translate option ABS time.seconds, which is going to create a movement of the noise. And I've set the output RGB to just noise as well. I've connected that noise to a level and brought the opacity under the post tab all the way down. And then connected that into the comp and set the parameter to screen. And essentially that gives us this sort of grain effect that you can see over the top. You can play with the opacity to determine how much you like. You can even, in the noise, set this to bring the object through like that, and then you can overlay noise like that so it just goes over the flower. It's really up to you. Cool. And then that is pretty much it, actually. I genuinely thought there was a lot more to do. But let's talk about... So yeah, that's basically the tutorial. Sorry. I basically want to quickly explain some of the other effects that are going on, as well as the shapes, in terms of what you can do from... Say if you've copied the tutorials to be the exact same, what you can do now to sort of create some differences between the two, and then maybe create a bunch of different shapes, which you could even switch between in a live context or just in however way you want. So some of the other effects that are going on is just like a displace. You can see if I set this to my background and then add in a displace like this, and I plug this value in, I have a simple one of these essentially going on, and then I've connected on the second input a slope. Whoops, that's the first input. Just going to swap these two around very quickly, which gives us a bit more refined control over the displace. Totally unnecessary. I've also got like some feedback edges to create more smooth trails like that, which you can control like that, which could be another audio reactive component. Totally unnecessary once again. I've also got from this convert onwards, I copied essentially these three nodes, the material, geometry, and the null. I then duplicated it and then set it to the same render, but then played with a difference. So what that looks like is if I go into the render here and then go to my geometry and type in Geo4 as well. So now it's rendering both of these geometries. Then, for example, if I change this to 180, you can see it's off-put, or maybe I want to bring the scale right up of this one. And then maybe I want to set the material instead to something like a line. And you can sort of create some really, really cool looking effects. Maybe you want to bring this settings right down like that. Just play around with it. and combine. That's essentially what I had going on up top with just some particles. And then finally, if we go all the way back to the start, I have the shape itself, and I can copy and paste that, plug this one in, and then immediately let's just start deforming it like that. Let's keep the anchors the same, maybe bring one of the rows down, one of the columns up. XY component, if you want to set the scale off. Essentially just be pretty playful. You can even change the connectivity to say like rows and columns, which will give you a much more limited shape, but there is no reason why you can't, for example here, play with the rendering to, for example, I turn the environment light up. There's no reason why you can't play around and create some very cool effects here. But yeah, I hope that help gives you a bit of a overview of a slightly more complicated audiovisual than what we do on this channel. Let me know how this tutorial was to follow. If you guys liked this one where I was a little bit more just like cutthroat about what we're doing and direct, then let me know. I would love to do more of that if that helps you get more visuals that are interesting to you and that you want to play around with. Additionally, again, this file is available to download. I'm just going to scrap the... should I keep both networks? I quite like this one I created in the tutorial. I might keep both networks and assign everything to work together. But yeah, please be playful. Play around with this stuff. Like, don't just feel like you have to follow the tutorials to a T. I want to create tutorials where people feel like they understand what each element is actually contributing to the overall visual, so that way when you build it, you know what it is that you can change and why it creates the sort of final visual, if that makes any sort of sense. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Sorry for the long one today, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.